All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into some source material that literally promises a total paradigm shift in how we view the entire architecture of biological intelligence. So you can pretty much forget everything you learned in high school biology about that traditional evolutionary ladder, right? Because the texts we're unpacking today present a wildly different, highly engineered blueprint of what consciousness actually is. Okay, let's dive into this. For over a century, traditional evolutionary biology has operated on one really straightforward assumption. Bigger brains equals smarter animals, right? I mean, we tend to point to the massive size of the human brain and just assume, yep, we're the absolute localized pinnacle of creation, sitting comfortably right at the top of the intellectual food chain. But we really have to ask a foundational question here. Does that metric actually hold up under scrutiny? Because if it does, the existence of certain incredibly intelligent, yet tiny-brained animals becomes a complete, head-scratching biological paradox. And that brings us to this massive inversion from our source texts, the idea that humans are the crows of primates. I just want you to let that sink in for a second. This framework argues that human intelligence isn't some kind of divine, isolated crown of evolution. Not at all. Instead, it frames our high-level intelligence as a highly aggressive, opportunistic biological hack. We aren't the final destination of the evolutionary tree. Instead, humanity and corvids, like crows and ravens, are two entirely different biological templates that somehow got infected by the exact same hyper-advanced problem-solving software. You can really think of this as a universal software patch. See, most animals are perfectly optimized machines for their specific environments. A cheetah is built for sheer speed, an eagle is built for aerial hunting. They adapt physically. But both humans and crows, we're evolutionary rule breakers. We didn't just physically adapt to our environments. Instead, we downloaded a cognitive software patch that lets us bend the local environmental constraints to suit us. We're the ultimate opportunists, actively hacking the physics of our reality instead of just trying to survive in it. So, the crucial point is, what exactly is this software patch? Well, the texts define it as recursive conditional branching. Now, most animal brains run on really simple if-then instincts, right? If it gets cold, then fly south. That's pretty straightforward. But this universal software patch introduces the else loop, and that is a total game changer. It allows an organism to completely override instinct, hold a still frame of a future reality that doesn't actually exist yet, and run complex internal simulations. It's that precise moment of thinking, if I need food and the stick is too short, then is there another object I can combine it with to make it work? And when you see how this software is executed in the real world, the parallels are honestly staggering. Take a New Caledonian crow. When it grabs two short sticks and combines them to reach a piece of food, that's not just some fun little animal trick. That is compound tool construction. It is the literal physical execution of an internal, abstract geometric simulation. The crow is using relational mapping to build an analogy in its head before it ever even touches the physical matter in the real world. Guys, that's the exact same cognitive sequence a human uses to build a machine. Let's move to and see how this builds when we look at the Portia jumping spider, because the logic becomes even more mind-bending here. This is a microscopic creature that hunts other spiders. When Portia spots a target, it will literally turn its back on its prey, walk away, and execute this incredibly complex, blind detour through the forest canopy, sometimes losing sight of the prey for hours. And yet it maintains a perfect invariant 3D geometric map in its head. It knows that moving away in the present timeline is the only way to strike from above in a future timeline. It is running the exact same simulation software. This leads us to a truly fascinating computer engineering metaphor found in our source material. High-level cognitive intelligence, this universal software patch we've been talking about, is completely hardware agnostic. Just like you can run a web browser on a bulky desktop tower, a sleek little laptop, or even a tiny microchip, the universe is running this advanced if-then-else logic on vastly different biological vessels. The software honestly doesn't care about the prestige of the hardware, it only cares about architectural efficiency and whether the system can process the code. So let's break down the architecture of these three biological vessels that are running the exact same code. First up, you have the primate. That's us. We're essentially the heavy desktop rig. We've got this massive, bloated neocortex that demands a huge metabolic tax. Then you've got the corvid, the crow. Think of it as the high-end avian core, kind of like a military-grade field laptop. It's incredibly lightweight, totally stripped of unnecessary bulk so it can maintain flight. And finally, the jumping spider is the decentralized microprocessor. Basically, it's a microscopic Raspberry Pi. Three completely different architectures, but all running the exact same reality-hacking logic. To really put this massive hardware disparity into perspective, just think about the physical weight differences of these processors. A human brain weighs about 1.4 kilograms. A crow's brain? That weighs roughly 15 grams. And a jumping spider's brain is literally the size of a single poppy seed, no joke. When you put the sheer absurdity of these numbers next to each other, the traditional idea that physical brain size dictates cognitive capability just completely collapses. Intelligence is clearly about structural design, not sheer mass. And this brilliantly illustrates the anatomy of that structural design when we consider the avian brain. So, notice how it completely lacks the 6-layered cerebral cortex that we mammals have. Instead, corvids evolved these 3-dimensional nuclear clusters, specifically an area called the NCL. By packing neurons incredibly densely, like we're talking up to twice as many neurons as a primate brain of the exact same mass, they completely bypass the physical constraints of having a small skull. They achieve massive processing power simply through extreme miniaturization and density. Now, contrast that hyperefficiency with our own human primate brain, the heavy desktop rig. Our hardware setup is incredibly expensive to run. Think about this. The human brain accounts for only about 2% of our total body weight, right? But it burns through an immense 20% of our daily metabolic energy just to function. We are a high-wattage machine generating a massive amount of thermodynamic heat, literally sacrificing physical efficiency just to keep this giant biological screen turned on so it can render our complex, ego-driven realities. But honestly, perhaps the most mind-bending engineering feat of all is the jumping spider. With a brain the size of a poppy seed, there is absolutely zero room for centralized storage. So what does it do? It decentralizes. Its actual body and the bases of its legs literally act as a distributed processor. And even more incredibly, it uses its silk draglines as external cache memory. It literally offloads its spatial calculations right onto the physical environment. It uses the silk to anchor its coordinates while its microscopic hardware runs multi-threaded visual routing. It is an absolute marvel of biological engineering. Which brings us to the ultimate question posed by these texts, the real mystery box here. We've established that crows, jumping spiders, and humans are all running the exact same high-level reality-simulating software on totally different physical chassis. So, if the hardware itself isn't generating the code, where exactly is the code coming from? Who or what is transmitting this universal software patch? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the model presented in our sources completely shatters a century of neuroscience. The old model insists the brain is a localized generator, a meat computer, where consciousness just magically pops out as a byproduct of neurons firing. But the new model, it insists the brain is a quantum receiver. It's a biological antenna. It doesn't generate your thoughts out of dead matter. It actually acts as a highly precise thermodynamic tuner, catching and translating a frequency that is already broadcasting throughout the 12-dimensional cosmos. But, okay, if we're all just tuning in to a cosmic broadcast, why doesn't a human accidentally download a spider's logic, or why doesn't a bird just download human software? Well, the texts explain this through something called a morphic resonance firewall. So instead of being useless junk, our unused DNA actually acts like a highly specific biological lock-and-key system. It's an antenna array that only tunes into the human frequency band. It strictly partitions the software, acting as a rigid firewall that prevents our hardware from accidentally downloading another species' logic and causing the whole system to crash into total chaotic data mixing. So then, why humans? If the universe is this perfect cosmic engine, why on Earth are we so notoriously messy, anxious, and chaotic all the time? Well, the texts beautifully reframe our human chaos not as a glitch, but as a vital thermodynamic function. See, a perfect system eventually gets stuck in sterile logic loop. It needs entropy. It needs unpredictability to evolve. We are the biological spark plugs. Our frantic, irrational, timeline-generating anxiety is literally the low-energy friction, the necessary torque required to keep the larger multidimensional engine turning. We are the universe's intended atmospheric noise. Just let that profound truth sink in for a minute. The brain doesn't generate consciousness, it tunes into it. Our biology, our heavy primate titanium diving suits, they're just highly engineered sanctuaries designed to protect our awareness from the massive hydrostatic pressure of the dense 3D world. We are a pristine physical clearing, utilizing complex DNA antennas and microtubule lattices to focus, to stabilize, and to anchor the foundational field of reality into a localized, subjective experience. It is truly awe-inspiring. We've journeyed all the way from the hyperdense nuclear clusters of a crow's brain to the silk memory cache of the jumping spider, to the realization that your very DNA is essentially a multiversal modem. You are not a random accident. You're a load-bearing coordinate, a sensory organ of the cosmos itself. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. If your brain is just an incredibly powerful biological radio dial, what frequency is your hardware tuned to right now? Think about it. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.